Hello everyone, I'm Brior, and welcome back to Good Game Empire. This video is yet another episode in my History of Empire series. To watch all of the other episodes in order, you can click on the playlist link in the description. 2019 was a pretty interesting year for Good Game Empire. There was no shortage of new content. New additions included improvements to the Outer Realms, Relic equipment, townships and daimyo castles, the Master Blacksmith, new buildings like the Relicus and the Armory, and Beyond the Horizon. In the background, Good Game Studios was also working to transition Empire from Adobe Flash to HTML5. True, many players, including myself, weren't feeling too hot about Empire's monetization and PvP balance. However, I think that during this period, Good Game Studios demonstrated a commitment to working on Empire over the long haul. We start, as we have for most years, in January. Good Game Studios introduced new filtering capabilities on the attack screen and in the equipment inventory. Players can now specify what quality level of tools the Autofill feature would use. Additionally, players could limit Autofill to certain sections of their attack, such as the 3rd through 6th waves on the right flank. Autofill was still not as robust a system as attack presets, but these technical improvements would become more important after Good Game Studios introduced more types of troops and tools, as well as additional attack waves. Equipment filtering would likewise become more important later in the year, after Good Game Studios had introduced Relic pieces. There were also some new appearance build items, as well as some permanent Castellan looks. Additionally, Good Game Studios modified the Foreigners and the Blood Crows such that they would no longer launch attacks on players. Defense had once been a significant part of the foreign invasion and had worked to convey the impression that the event really was a war between the realms, or servers. However, over the years, players had grown stronger while the foreign lords remained the same. Incoming attacks were now mere nuisances, and Good Game Studios evidently felt it would be best to remove them entirely rather than to rebalance them. Also in January, Good Game Studios reintroduced the Shapeshifter Castellan that it had previously postponed due to player feedback. You'll recall that players, including myself, warned that this set would be too powerful. Around this time in Empire, players' food production was ballooning, and their castle defenses could already be nigh impregnable. Good Game Studios almost certainly knew, though, that Relic equipment was coming, and that the Shapeshifter Castellan would need to be added now if it was going to have any effect in the game. 3 versions of the Shapeshifter Castellan were added. The weakest was available for charms, while the strongest could only be purchased using rubies. This set, of course, took advantage of the power level system Good Game Studios had added the year before. February and March saw a number of significant changes. Good Game Studios took its biggest step yet in converting Empire from Adobe Flash to HTML5. Everything other than the Great Kingdom would now be developed exclusively in HTML5. The transition away from Flash was necessary because support for that software was ending. Assuming you were active on the internet around that time, you might remember that many other websites, including YouTube, were also ditching Flash. While I don't have any special insight regarding how difficult it was for Good Game Studios to change Empire's base architecture, I imagine it wasn't easy. Other free-to-play browser games weren't so lucky, and I remember thinking that Good Game Studios' decision to introduce HTML5 was a good sign that Empire would continue to exist. Good Game Studios also introduced 2 new collector's events, the Carnival of the Phoenix, where the player collected beads, and the Hive Mind, where the player collected bees. Hopefully I've managed to properly enunciate the difference. There were also significant improvements to the Outer Realms. In particular, 2 new scoring methods were added. The Heritage Hunter version is probably the simplest and the best balanced. All players start the event with a set amount of heritage points, which are also added each day. To increase their own heritage points, players must collect them from other players through PvP. Naturally, players had to simultaneously defend their own castles to avoid losing heritage points to others. While the Heritage Hunter is running, Good Game Studios sells packs that include XP. One might expect that a higher level account would fare better in the event because it could send more powerful attacks. However, Higher level accounts can also receive larger attacks. Accordingly, the XP offers presented an interesting strategic dilemma and meant that the Heritage Hunter mode wasn't completely a contest to see who could spend the most money. The Snappy Swap mode, added a bit later in April, might be the most accessible version of the Outer Realms for free players. All you need to do is successfully attack a player with a high ranking each day right before the daily reset. Personally, I'm still not sure that the Outer Realms' new modes were all that fun, but they were arguably more interesting and certainly more accessible than the Masters of Might. Good Game Studios also added global server effects, like increased attack speed. Global server effects appeared first in the Outer Realms, but were later added to the primary servers. Increased attack speed in particular can be helpful for attacking dragons and desert fortresses, as well as for events like the Storm Islands. You have to unlock it for rubies. New encampment upgrades brought the total number of permanent unlockable commanders to 35. Additionally, Good Game Studios added 4 new upgrades to the barracks, unlocking relic troops and giving players something to spend their construction and upgrade tokens on that wasn't the relic greenhouse. I'm not sure exactly when, but at some point not later than February 2019, Good Game Studios also increased the unit capacity per recruitment slot up to 80 for a level 5 barracks. Up until this change, players could only recruit 5 units per slot at a time, and so needed to be online consistently to operate their barracks and recruit armies. The fastest method of recruitment was actually to queue single units and double them via the Alliance Help button. As you might imagine, players used bots to automate recruitment. This change, then, was Good Game Studios' response. Again, though, it wasn't necessarily part of the same update that added relic levels to the barracks. I just thought now would be a good time to mention it. Other spring changes included more powerful premium tools, like 6% glory banners, as well as higher-level food storage build items for the bakery. Finally, Good Game Studios refreshed the rewards associated with the nobility contests and the Wheel of Fortune. These changes further increased Empire's monetization at the expense of unpaying players. In a Q2 roadmap unveiled at the end of March, Good Game Studios teased 2 significant updates: relic equipment and a new mechanic for the Samurai Invasion. Good Game Studios also finally confirmed the removal of the Alliance cities and the Battle of the Royal Capital event. April's changes included the Relic Woodcutter, a new wood production building that would later become useful due to its build item slots, and a lost and found inventory for equipment rewards the player received when they were up against the equipment storage cap. Relic equipment, which worked its way into the game in May, represented Good Game Studios' effort to once again allow players to design custom sets. Good Game Studios made relic equipment obtainable via event quests, the Alliance Smithy, and a new quest chain that introduced the feature. I think it was a mixed success. Relic sets were certainly more customizable than the unique sets Good Game Studios had added ever since the gem effect cap controversy in 2017. After that debacle, Good Game Studios have been careful to ensure that the most important equipment effects, such as extra courtyard strength or ranged or melee combat strength, were generally reserved for complete set bonuses. That way, individual set pieces could be kept basically useless, and players couldn't find unintentionally strong combinations. However, relic equipment, I think, lacked the uniqueness, for lack of a better word, of the unique sets. Players would no longer use commanders that signified any particular level of achievement in any of Empire's events, for example. Because relic equipment was usually obtained with random effects, and always with random stats, I don't think it was necessarily as motivating as, say, an event reward as unique pieces had been. Additionally, relic equipment was arguably a bit overcomplicated. Beginning later in the year, in September to be specific, relic equipment not only displayed raw percentages, down to a decimal point, but also a somewhat confusing star system. There were 6 rarity levels: 1 blue, 2 empty, 2 blue, 1 empty, 3 blue, 1 silver, 2 blue, 2 silver, 1 blue, and 3 gold. Got that? Relic equipment could convey a greater variety of effects than all previous levels of equipment. Gem and hero effects, for example, now differed by the type of target, whether NPC or real enemy player. Combined, this meant that while players could customize their castellans and commanders, they'd need to find pieces with the right amount of very specific effects. As a result, their commanders and castellans would mostly end up feeling the same. A small technical improvement in May made it so that building workload now took into effect any base production build items. Now, players wouldn't have to manually check their build items to ensure the most efficient placement. In June, Good Game Studios added a new building, the Military Academy, where players could complete training programs that temporarily increase the strength of certain troop types. The training program effects were very specific, like plus 1.16 combat strength per unit for veteran macemen and crossbowmen for 2 hours when attacking Bloodcrow castles. The training programs weren't necessarily cheap, either, costing rubies, coins, or event currencies on top of the construction and upgrade tokens the player would have to have spent to construct the Military Academy in the first place. Because of this, and because the Military Academy has not been updated to support the latest troop types, I think it's essentially been a bust and is totally unused in the game. It's one of the only features that when I searched for it on YouTube to see if somebody else had a video of them using it, I couldn't find anything. An interesting idea though. Another June change was that players would now earn Apprentice Blacksmith tokens rather than the usual rewards for participating in LTPEs, or seasonal events. We talked about the Apprentice Blacksmith in the context of compensation for the gem effect cap controversy in 2017. As I said at the time, it ended up being a precursor for gold and silver pieces and the Master Blacksmith. There were now also stronger premium tools for the Nomad and Samurai invasions. The Samurai invasion saw further changes in July, when Good Game Studios debuted the Legion of the Daimyos mechanic. This added 2 new types of event camp, Daimyo castles and townships. Daimyo castles were attackable, but could also be taunted into attacking the townships. Players would need to station support at the townships and to configure the townships as defenses. Attacking Daimyo castles and defending townships would net the player samurai medals, which, together with samurai tokens, could be spent on prizes like powerful food production build items at the samurai medal shop. By interacting with the Daimyo castles and townships, Alliance members could also complete contracts and earn doubloons for the Alliance treasury. Doubloons could then be spent to activate temporary event boosters, much like a temporary boost to glory earned during the foreign invasion. Players would also earn war effort points for their alliance, which would determine the alliance's ranking and thus eligibility for yet additional rewards. That brings us to August, which is when Good Game Studios added 2 new buildings, the Relicus and the Armory, both related to equipment and could only be built in the player's main castle. The Relicus is an improved version of the Technicus that allows players to upgrade their relic equipment. Upgrading relic equipment costs not only coins, but also relic shards, a currency that comes from selling relic equipment and/or completing quests. As with the Technicus, Relicus upgrades are not guaranteed unless the player spends rubies. Relic equipment can be upgraded more times than equipment of lesser rarity, but each upgrade only increases each stat by 0.1%. Accordingly, I think most players would say relic upgrades are quite expensive and that it is not worth using the Relicus to upgrade anything but the pieces with the best base stats. Again, I think that's partly responsible for everybody's relic commanders looking pretty much the same. The Armory responded to player demands for an increased equipment storage cap. A level 20 Armory grants 500 public order, an increase of 100 to equipment storage capacity, and another increase of 100 to gem storage capacity. However, the Armory requires construction and upgrade tokens to build, and it takes up space in the castle that would otherwise be used for food production. Additionally, most players don't actually have any need for greater equipment and gem storage. Having a larger storage merely means more stuff for the player to sell or forge when the storage does eventually fill up. In September, Good Game Studios added a new in-game shop. It would eventually replace the payment shop entirely. This also made it possible for, say, a dozen special offers to be running in the bottom right of the screen, while, at the same time, dozens of additional special packages would be available in this new in-game shop. In recent years, in light of the overwhelming number and variety of things to buy in Good Game Empire, I think it's become more difficult to figure out how to get the best value. In fact, I recently made a video discussing Good Game Studios' bizarre and sometimes inconsistent pricing schemes, which sometimes result in cheaper offers having greater value. You can watch that video at the link in the description. October's biggest change was the Master Blacksmith. The Master Blacksmith, especially when it first launched, was the most favorable update for unpaying players since perhaps the Wishing Well. It's worth talking about in some detail. To purchase rewards at the Master Blacksmith, the player would need either gold or silver pieces. LTPEs and the Kingdoms League would be the most significant sources of gold and silver pieces, but a limited number could be obtained at almost every event shop. The Master Blacksmith marked a bold new approach to Empire's economy. In contrast to everything that came before, gold and silver pieces were a universal currency. Because gold and silver pieces came from more sources, and could be spent on a greater variety of prizes than any previous currency, it would now arguably be more challenging for Good Game Studios to balance Empire's economy. But there were many advantages. First, the Master Blacksmith gave players more control over what rewards they received. No longer would the player simply get troops, then tools, then a season points booster, for example, in the LTPE, in that order. Instead, the player could prioritize the prizes he thought were the most valuable, at least until the Master Blacksmith's stock was depleted. Next, we've discussed previously in this series how, at various points in Empire's history, certain events had suffered from outdated rewards. Even though Good Game Studios spent a considerable amount of time and resources continually updating the event reward pools, some events, like the Thorn King or the Storm Islands, had remained overlooked. If each event awarded a global currency, however, Good Game Studios would need only to update and balance a single shop. Third, allow me to repeat that the Master Blacksmith, especially as it was first introduced, was a great change for unpaying players. In particular, unpaying players could now acquire premium tools and compete with paying players in the events. As Good Game Studios had initially priced it, premium event tools were actually really cheap. I don't remember whether there was any cap on the amount of tools you could buy at first, but if there was, it was quite high. The hordes of premium tools some paying players had been sitting on were now worth considerably less. We've talked previously in this series about how Good Game Studios needs to balance Empire in three different ways. There's the balance between offense and defense, the balance between unpaying and paying players, and the balance across Empire's events. The Master Blacksmith addressed at least two aspects of Empire's balance directly and favorably for unpaying players. That's why it was a great update. Also in August, I released a video in which I interviewed two employees at Good Game Studios. It was kind of them to agree to the interview. Interviewing Good Game Studios remains, in my view, one of the coolest things I've managed to do with this YouTube channel. Toward the end of that interview, when I asked whether they could tell me anything about the future of the game, they suggested players should keep their eyes on the horizon.
Yeah, like I already mentioned, there is something on the horizon coming up. Let me guess what I can give you some nice information for that.
Little did we know that this itself was a clue, or an Easter egg. In October, Good Game Studios released a new event, Beyond the Horizon. Like the Outer Realms, the event was a global competition hosted on its own server that players would have to go beyond their primary account to get to. As with the Outer Realms, this meant that Good Game Studios could control the monetization and balance of Beyond the Horizon separately. Unfortunately, in my experience, Beyond the Horizon was another highly monetized event. Here's how it worked, though. In the event, players would compete together with their alliance. The first alliance member to enter Beyond the Horizon would be designated the alliance leader and given control of the alliance capital. All participating players would then collect alliance influence by capturing NPC city-states and/or stealing influence via PvP. As with the Heritage Hunter version of the Outer Realms, players would need to defend their own castles to prevent enemy players from stealing points from them. Influence would be transferred to the alliance capital, which was itself attackable, on a daily basis from players' main castles. To protect the Alliance capital, the Alliance leader would need to strengthen its defenses, most obviously by paying for and equipping a Castellan. Practically speaking, this required the Alliance leader to pay real money in the event. Accordingly, not many players have been eager to serve as the Alliance leader, which I think deters participation. Other features of the Beyond the Horizon map included observation towers, which, like King's Towers, were capturable, and provided an attack bonus against city-states and Alliance capitals, altars, which reduced city-state capture time, and cultist shrines, NPCs that you could loot. The scarcity of coins was the principal limitation on what players could do in Beyond the Horizon. Players discovered that they could sell decorations, including the castle gardens that spawned automatically in the Alliance capital, to raise a few coins. Perhaps unpaying players were intended to get more resources from attacking cultist shrines, but in my experience, the loot was pitiful and there were long cooldowns. As with the Outer Realms, however, Good Game Studios introduced premium offers that provided everything the player might need to participate. The rewards associated with Beyond the Horizon included, for the very top performing alliances, the Relic Bakery and the Relic Storehouse. These buildings had similar effects to their non-Relic counterparts, but could only be upgraded with construction and upgrade tokens. Also in October, Good Game Studios revised Empire's tutorial for new players, added 10 lucky pennies per month as a perk for the lower tier player subscription, removed the Architect and the Researcher, and reduced the number of sale pop-ups. In November, Good Game Studios added the Relic Conservatory, yet another food production building. It was essentially a more expensive version of the Relic Greenhouse. November's most significant update, however, was the Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence, which was essentially the Wheel of Fortune on steroids. The Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence was a major shift back in the direction of prioritizing paid players, and in particular, players who are willing to gamble. And make no mistake about it, that's exactly what the Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence is: gambling. Nothing the player does after purchasing affluence tickets has any effect on the prizes he receives. There's no strategic choice or skill involved. By spinning the Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence, players could win large numbers of premium troops and tools, as well as powerful equipment and decorations. Lucky players could also win up to 1 million rubies. A month or two after the Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence was released, Good Game Studios announced that it was increasing the ruby jackpot, but decreasing the likelihood that it would be won. Players who weren't paying attention to the game's forums or Discord server, but who were rather just seeing the Wheel of Unimaginable Affluence in-game, would probably notice that the jackpot had doubled to up to 2 million rubies. However, they wouldn't have any notice of the fact that the odds of winning it had gone down. One has to wonder whether this reduction was planned from the beginning. Viewed in that way, the increased likelihood of winning rubies for the first few weeks was a clever means to promote participation in the event. Following the introduction of the Master Blacksmith, who sold regular tickets, and the Wheel of Affluence, the Wheel of Fortune, and in particular its VIP mode, has become more of a free-to-play feature and is a decent source for winning rubies, even for unpaid players. In December, Good Game Studios added another gambling event, the Fortune Teller, where the player dumps rubies to earn random prizes. Quite reliably, the first 100 rubies you spend at the Fortune Teller results in a return of 200 rubies, which makes it a great way to satisfy one of your daily tasks. Around the same time, Good Game Studios added additional temporary equipment looks that conveyed the effect of extra attack waves. These could be earned as wheel prizes as well as through other methods. This helped nudge the PvP balance back toward favoring offense, but it wasn't enough, and it was accessible only to paying players. To cap off the year, Good Game Studios introduced new winter-themed appearance build items and a neat new permanent chest-themed castle skin. What can we take away from this summary of everything that happened in 2019? Well, I think that there are two things. First, and this is a trend that I think probably started the year before, in 2018, Good Game Studios was releasing updates that were increasingly complicated. This presented new avenues for strategic choice, but the new features, I'm thinking of, for example, the Outer Realms, Beyond the Horizon, the scoring system for the attack of the Shapeshifters, relic equipment, and many more things, were actually, I think, less accessible to new players, both because they weren't unlocked until the high levels or the end game, but also because, again, they were more difficult to figure out. The other takeaway is that, by this point, Empire was in its 8th year of existence, and I think there's something to be said for the fact that Good Game Studios was releasing new content even at that time. Indeed, they're still releasing new content today. That's pretty remarkable, don't you think? Not everything that happened in 2019 was good for the game, but the Master Blacksmith was good in both design and execution, which I think caught some players off guard. In fact, I think it caught Good Game Studios off guard. Accordingly, I think that 2019 fares fairly well as far as the history of Good Game Empire is concerned. That's all for today. Allow me to invite you to provide your thoughts in the comments below, as I'm always eager to get viewers' reactions. Also remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you really liked it. Thank you for watching. I've been Brior, and I'll see you next time.